Okay, so let's dive in. Big news coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The army's asking the Senate to lift former President Joseph Kabila's immunity.
That's right. A really significant development.
Absolutely. So the big question is, why now? I mean, what's behind this push? What are they actually accusing him of?
Exactly. And, what's the bigger picture here for the DRC, which is already dealing with so much instability?
That's what we want to unpack. We're looking at an explainer from Al Jazeera, published just a few days ago, May 2nd, 2025. Seems like a good, timely source for this.
Yeah, it gives a solid overview of a very tangled situation.
So for anyone needing a quick refresher, Joseph Kabila, he was president from 2001, right after his father, until 2019. Quite a long stint.
A very long time. And his exit wasn't exactly smooth, with those delayed elections stirring up a lot of controversy.
Right. And his successor, Felix Tshisekedi.
Oh.
Well, they started with a power-sharing deal, but let's just say it didn't last.
Yeah.
Fraught is how Al Jazeera puts it.
Fraught is probably putting it mildly. That deal crumbled pretty quickly.
And this whole immunity issue is happening against a backdrop of serious conflict in the eastern DRC, isn't it, with the M23 rebels?
Precisely. Yeah, the M23 group has been battling government forces for months. There was recently a ceasefire announced after talks in Qatar, but the situation is still incredibly tense.
So that conflict is, like, central to this move against Kabila.
It seems to be, yes. The government is directly linking him to that insurgency.
Okay, let's get into the specifics then.
Yeah.
What exactly are the accusations? What's the Justice Minister say?
Well, Justice Minister Constant Mutamba has stated pretty publicly that the government has evidence implicating Kabila in, quote, supporting a rebel insurgency in the east.
Supporting rebels. Okay. Did he give more detail?
He did. He specified things like treason, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and participation in an insurrectional movement. Really serious charges.
Extremely serious. Treason, war crimes. And he also mentioned something about massacres.
Yes, he alluded to evidence of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and massacres of peaceful civilians and military personnel, but didn't provide the specific details in that statement.
So the core accusation is this alleged alliance with M23.
That seems to be the main thrust, yes, that he's somehow backing the M23 rebels operating out east.
And wasn't there something about him showing up recently in rebel territory?
Exactly. His reported reappearance last month in Goma territory, which is, held by the rebels, that definitely fueled speculation and probably strengthened the government's resolve here.
Yeah, I can see how that would raise eyebrows. Has the government already taken action against him, besides this immunity request?
Oh, yes. They haven't been sitting still. There are travel restrictions on his family, his political party. The PPRD has been suspended.
Suspended.
Wow. And they've ordered the seizure of his assets, again, citing these charges of supporting M23. Now, whether those assets are actually under state control yet, that part's a bit unclear.
Okay, so they're moving on multiple fronts. Let's talk more about M23. They're obviously key here. Who are they? What do they want?
Right. M23 is, well, the most prominent of maybe, over 100 armed groups in the eastern DRC. It's an incredibly fragmented situation.
100 groups. That's staggering.
It is. And they're all essentially vying for control over the region's vast mineral wealth. We're talking cobalt, coltan, gold, minerals crucial for, phones, computers, batteries.
So huge economic stakes. And who's thought to be backing M23? You mentioned potential outside involvement.
Yeah, this is where it gets even more complicated. The UN and the US have both pointed fingers at neighboring Rwanda, claiming they support M23.
And Rwanda's response?
Well, Rwandan President Paul Kagame hasn't explicitly denied it, which obviously adds weight to those claims for many observers.
So what does M23 itself say it's fighting for?
Their stated goals are about protecting Congolese Tutsis, people of Rwandan origin living in the DRC, from discrimination, and also about transforming the DRC more broadly.
But critics see that differently.
Critics argue it's basically a pretext, a cover for Rwanda's influence and interests in the resource-rich East.
And M23 isn't new, right? They have a history there?
Not at all. They're largely made up of former ethnic Tutsi rebels who were actually integrated into the DRC army after the big Congo Wars.
The ones in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Exactly. But they later defected again around 2012, claiming discrimination and saying peace deals weren't being honored.
And those Congo wars themselves were linked to the Rwandan genocide aftermath, weren't they?
Deeply linked.
Yeah.
The flight of Hutu genocidaires into eastern Congo after 1994 completely destabilized the region and was a major trigger for those wars. It's a long, tragic cycle.
So you have the DRC accusing Rwanda of backing M23.
Right. And then Rwanda turns around and accuses the DRC government of working with Hutu forces, the FDLR, remnants of those involved in the genocide against M23.
It's just accusations flying back and forth, and M23 has taken territory before.
Yes, they famously seized Goma, a major city, back in 2012. They withdrew then, under pressure, but recently they've taken Goma again, and Bukavu too.
And the human cost.
Devastating. The fighting just in Goma back in January reportedly killed at least 3,000 people, huge numbers displaced. It's a humanitarian crisis on top of the political one.
Let's circle back to Kabila. Has he said anything in response to these government accusations?
So far, nothing publicly directly from him. Silence.
But his allies aren't staying quiet.
No, definitely not. People like Ferdinand Cambert from his PPRD party, they're calling it relentless persecution. Cambert even suggested it's a sign Tshisekedi's government is nearing its end. Pretty strong words.
Very strong. And Kabila himself, he's disagreed with how Tshisekedi has handled the M23 situation before, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. He's been critical, saying Tshisekedi should be talking directly to the rebels, not relying on outside mediators like Qatar.
He wrote an op-ed about this.
Yes, in South Africa's Sunday Times. He basically said the DRC was close to imploding under Tshisekedi because of the conflict. And he also accused Tshisekedi of trying to cling to power by talking about changing the constitution.
Ah, the term limits issue. Tshisekedi mentioned possibly reviewing that.
He did back in 2023. Said he might review it, let the people decide. Kabila framed that as an attempt to stay in power beyond the limits.
So a lot of political maneuvering going on. Is Kabila trying to position himself in some way? There was talk of him meeting opposition leaders.
There was. He's had talks, which led to some speculation. Is he trying to become the lead negotiator with M23? He hasn't said that himself, but the idea is out there.
But Tshisekedi's camp sees it very differently.
Completely differently. They see Kabila as undermining the government, actively supporting M23, and they point to his ties with Corneille Nangaa.
Right, Nangaa. Remind us who he is again.
Nangaa headed the Electoral Commission, CENI, from 2015 to 2021. So he oversaw the controversial 2018 election that brought Tshisekedi to power.
Okay, and they had a falling out.
A major falling out, yeah, over how those elections were run. Nangaa became a critic and then, quite dramatically, joined a rebel group himself in 2023.
Wow, so the former election chief is now a rebel leader and linked to Kabila.
According to the government, yes. That connection definitely fuels their suspicions about Kabila's motives.
And there's also this new opposition alliance.
Yes, just formed. Kabila, Moise Katumbi, Martin Fayulu, Deli Sasanga, some big opposition names. They've jointly called for a Congolese-led national dialogue, rejecting just relying on the Qatar ceasefire process.
Why? What's their reasoning?
They're pointing to bad governance under Tshisekedi as the root cause of the crisis. So they want internal talks, not just external mediation.
Okay, so shifting to the legal side, how does this immunity thing work in the DRC? Can they just strip it away?
Well, the Constitution provides immunity for presidents, former presidents, senators, but there's a clause that can be lifted for gross misconduct.
Gross misconduct, that's the key phrase.
That's the threshold. And the Army has now officially asked the Senate to make that determination and revoke Kabila's immunity based on these allegations.
What are analysts saying about the potential impact of this?
People like Kambale Musavuli, a researcher focusing on Congo-Kinshasa, see this as potentially huge, a pivotal moment, he called it.
Pivotal in what sense?
In the sense of potentially breaking a cycle of impunity, holding powerful figures accountable, which hasn't always happened in the DRC's history. It could be a major step towards justice if it proceeds.
It's rare for former leaders to face prosecution in the region, isn't it?
It is often complex, politically charged, and challenging. Success really depends on the specific context, the strength of legal institutions, and the political will at the time.
And Kabila's own path to power was unusual, too. He wasn't a career politician initially.
No, he came from a military background, became president very suddenly in 2001 when his father, Laurent Kabila, who had himself taken power in a rebellion, was assassinated.
Right, and he stayed until 2019. We mentioned the controversial and the delayed 2016 elections.
Yes, and the whole issue around term limits. The Constitution had a 2-term limit, but it was essentially reset with a new Constitution in 2006, allowing him to run again. That caused a lot of tension back then, too.
So what happens next? Is there a timeline for the Senate vote, or a potential trial?
It's really unclear. We don't know when the Senate might vote on lifting the immunity. And even if they do, starting an actual trial, that could take quite some time. It's not straightforward.
And Musavuli, the researcher, had a thought on Kabila's recent appearance in Goma.
Yeah, he suggested it might not just be symbolic. It could be Kabila actively trying to consolidate alliances, maybe even openly defying the government in Kinshasa.
So a power play, potentially?
Potentially. Musavuli argues that to really get at the roots of the conflict, Kabila and anyone else involved need to face justice, to expose the wider networks, political, economic, that keep these conflicts going.
Especially with those minerals involved.
Exactly. That mineral wealth is always lurking in the background, funding groups, driving the fighting. It's inseparable from the conflict.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We're seeing the DRC government making a major move against former President Kabila, seeking to lift his immunity.
Right. Accusing him of incredibly serious crimes, treason, war crimes primarily linked to alleged support for the M23 rebels in the east.
And this is all happening within this incredibly complex environment of ongoing conflict, deep political rivalries, particularly between Kabila and President Tshisekedi.
And the ever-present factor of the eastern DRC's immense contested mineral wealth. You can't understand the situation without considering all those layers.
Yeah. So for you listening, try and get a handle on this quickly. It's crucial to see beyond just the headlines about immunity, the history, the regional dynamics, the resources. It's all interconnected.
Absolutely. It's a situation with deep roots and many, many facets.
It really gives you a lot to think about. You know, considering this long history of conflict, instability, all the different players involved, both inside the DRC and internationally, what are the potential long-term consequences here? I mean, regardless of whether Kabila actually ends up facing trial.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. What does this whole episode tell us about the challenges, the really immense challenges, of finding lasting peace and accountability in that region? It feels like it's about much more than just one person's fate.
It really does. A question with no easy answers, unfortunately.